second one was representation, which is accountability and, you know, would they fit under that? In other words, what's their accountability? Well, we know it's not to the people per se, but what would be their lines that you would think? Well, Muhammad might be imams. Okay, well, we know that to be true.
Or even self.
Actually, out that.
Or their leaders.
Who's the guy that,
Yeah, and Leslie, I would say that they've made personal commitments to their religion, although I do think there's an order that's in there.
Well,
They're not
the
anarchists.
person who's above it all.
Right,
Yeah.
but it could
He's
be,
looking out for himself.
it could be imam, or it could, they just could say Muhammad, but they certainly have a military organization of hierarchy.
And the training people.
Right. 3, are there laws or moral codes associated with this group?
The ones that they form.
Right. Now again, I'm not talking whether or not we believe it.
Right.
You know, government it can exist and you can say it's all wrong, but it still has these aspects. So yeah, there's a law, Sharia. Now here's the part I think that it messes up our government, jurisdiction. Because our government, I believe, thinks that unless it has geography, it's not legitimate government. And I think that's a mistake. Because I think government exists outside of geography. Government exists out, if your family doesn't own a piece of property, it can still be a family. I mean, you can live in an RV and change its location every week, but there's still family and it's still a government, right? So geography has nothing to do with government. Now I would argue that they sure enough have geography anyway now.
Yeah,
Exactly. Right.
I mean, they're controlling certain areas that are functioning under their law.
Right.
And then number 5 is, again, the question is how stable or how long is this outfit prepared to stay around?
they're willing to the death.
Forever.
Until we go there and blow them up.
Forever. So the question we put to the class is ISIS or ISIL a government? What's the answer biblically?
Yes.
Yes.
So, Pastor, gangs in America fall under this too.
Excuse me?
Gangs in America.
Yeah, they would be a form of government. They would be a form of government. See, we've been locked into a mentality that says the word government, the only legitimate word, usage of government is civil government in the sense of a nation or maybe a community. That's what we've locked into when it comes to government. But that, you have to understand, when God says the word government in Scripture, and He does, He's not just saying civil. He's not talking just about the county supervisors or the mayor or the legislators in Columbia. That's not what that's an aspect of it, but that's not the whole deal. So yes, ISIL is a government and it's functioning currently as a government. So but our government, our federal government, is locked into a mentality that's saying, well, if they don't have an embassy and they don't have a geography and they don't have, parliament or and that's how they're thinking. But you made a perfect analogy. If we had a gang that began to duplicate in cities all over America, and they networked and they decided they were going to create chaos and anarchy in our cities, that's a form of government that you would have a legitimate right as civil government to declare war upon.
Yeah, they at one time were like a war on gangs or
Yeah, sometimes I'm not sure when they use those words to it's just how they do. It's just how they define something. But I'm talking about a legitimate process of declaring a war. Yes.
But that would still kind of tie into what she said, because even though they're more organized, they're still almost like a gang, and they have reached over to the United States, and therefore our government has jurisdiction to take them out, even though they don't think they do.
Right. And that's why our federal officials consternate, because you have a group that is functioning outside of, well, within a geography of Iraq, which is supposedly has its government. But you have this other government operating within this other government. So because of their mentality, they say to themselves, our government, our civil government is thinking more like ISIL's a gang in the conventional sense. It's a group of thugs running around with a religious philosophy, and we aren't we aren't declaring it a war. And that's a mistake, because they have the mentality of a government. They're functioning as a government. Yes, sir.
So you wouldn't classify like anarchy as a type of government? Like, for example, like what's going on in Ferguson right now, that is
No.
more anarchy, but however, they declared war when the municipal government declared war on the people participating.
Well, that they are bringing, yeah, because there was laws that were being broken. I mean, the general peace was being broken, other laws were being broken, and I mean, people can still operate in groups, but I don't think every group necessarily forms a government. I think that was solicited. It was everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. The scripture says there was a time Israel, everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and so that's when you're functioning outside of a government.
Well, like for the gangs, like for that would also probably be described as more anarchy than.
Well, it would depend. And probably at times you're right, but I think there are other times when they function under all of these sorts of things. They have a code they live by. They have very much a territory they've defined. I mean, but it can go either way. But again, government exists when it fulfills those things, and it can look the same. In other words, ISIL can look the same as the Bloods and the Crips. But that doesn't necessarily make each one a government, although you could argue that those gangs might be just by how they're organized. So, I'm sorry, Chris.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say, is it's almost, the biblical definition of government is almost synonymous with hierarchy of any sort. If there's a hierarchy, then you have the leadership, and then you have, whatever code they're following, and you have someone that's in charge, and then you have someone enforcing it. So at that point, it's almost like any organization with a hierarchy could be considered a government.
Except I think the one thing is enforcement. One of the keys of enforcement is to enforce its way. So I think enforcement has to, in other words, it would require of its, whatever's under its authority to function that way. So it would have the ability to enforce. So, for example, a business which might have a hierarchy, which has a boss, and you say, well, why isn't that a government? And maybe in some ways it reflects it, but the truth of the matter is, while it might be able to enforce a code within its business, you can more or less eject from its code. I'm not sure how far it would go, because I'm not sure I've thought that through, but government, I do want it to remain that government is far more than just what we define civilly. As well. It's interesting, I just thought of this in Isaiah, I believe it was chapter 9, and this is, you remember the Christmas passages? Isaiah 9:6, it says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders." And then in verse 7 it says, "Of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end." Now those are just kind of cute little Christmas passages we read without thinking through much as to what's being said here. And I've often preached this, that the only government that's valid or that lasts is that which Christ upholds. He upholds certain things. Again, I've already said to you that if a government determines to be lawless, he's under no obligation to uphold that government, whether it be your life, or whether it be a family, or whether it be civil government or a church. If he's not upholding it, then he's under no obligation, to keep it going. And it says And this is a great passage, and I don't want to open this can tonight, but I've been reading a lot of some areas because I'm doing some other study in some other areas. But when his government is in operation, the trajectory of it is always prospering. Now, that's not to say there aren't challenges in the kingdom of God, but generally the trajectory is abundance. I've come to give life and that more abundantly. I mean, I can go down the verses of prosperity and victory and conquering, and that's the nature of the gospel. And so when government functions under the precepts and the nature of the gospel and the word, your trajectory, while there'll be challenges, but the general trajectory is this is an ever increasing. Well, America did not prosper just because it had great harbors and rivers and resources. It was de Tocqueville who said, that French politician who traveled America, who when he looked at America, because remember both France and America were in a revolution at exactly the same time. Both of them were fighting over the concepts of liberty. France really rejected any type of religious input because they saw religion as the problem in France during that. They wanted liberty from not only oppression of dictators, but they wanted liberty from what they considered religious oppression. And they might have had some points because the Catholic Church was not always the epitome of benevolence. But they rejected it. So theirs was a very atheistic revolution. They wanted nothing to do. They wanted liberty, but nothing to do with anything with religion. Where in America, our liberty was based in our religion. There is no king but Jesus was the motto of the American Revolution. And so the question, I always ask the question, and sometimes the response is, why is America and France so different? Because you can look at both of these two countries who both had revolutions at exactly the same time and ask yourself the question, which one historically ended up better? Well, I think we'd all say, well, America. Well, the atheist simply says, well, it's because of all of our resources. We had so many internal resources that it just benefited us. But I maintain, and de Tocqueville said too, he said, it's not just because of America's vast resources and possibilities. He said, it wasn't until I went into her churches and I heard the pulpits of America aflame with righteousness that I understood why America was good. And if America ever ceases, to be righteous, she will cease to be good. That's what de Tocqueville said. And we're seeing that right now. We have political leaders who no longer think America needs to be great, or they don't understand our concepts of exceptionalism. I'm not dismissing the sins of America. America has sinned greatly. And America has to repent as any nation would over its sin. So I'm not letting America off the hook, but I am simply saying that America, by way of illustration, has been the only nation that has demonstrated the ever-increasing nature of God's blessing when it attempted to function under His laws and precepts. So anyway, back to ISIS. ISIS is indeed a government. Let me take just a minute. And let's go around the room and I've got questions here that I can put out, but I'm supposing all of you read, especially those of you that are students, so let's just start a conversation. Give me the one thing, we'll start with a real easy question. Give me the one thing that seemed to spring out to you from your reading that maybe you would just say, man, that caught my attention, I never thought of that, that was interesting, it really just kind of resonated. We'll start around the room. Brad.
Just the concept of the loss of self-government and the spiraling effect it has in all other areas of government. So as soon as we lose self-control, all of our other forms of government begin to spiral out.
Yes. Yeah, DeMar was clear on that. Once we lose self-government or self-control, everything else goes into chaos. But is it not interesting? Now think about this the way we do it. This is how the Bible shows us that rule, if we use the pyramid, rule starts, the foundation of it is self-control. And from here, that's how all government exists from the bottom up. Okay? That's why America originally was a representative government, because it flowed from the bottom up, not the top down. All right? But what if we switch now? We've switched to where we think the top can fix the bottom. So what do we try to do? We see problems in our culture and we go, and we get our presidential candidates in the primary and we say to them, what are you going to do about the broken educational system? Oh, and they'll say, well, we need to do these programs, or we need to throw this money at it, or we need to do this and this. And it never dawns on us that it doesn't matter what they say, it's not going to fix it. Because unless you fix the kids who are going to school every day and their parents, which is where government starts, and I got a witness from a teacher in the back from that. Isn't that true?
Yes.
I mean, you could, I'm not kidding you might want, Anna, you know, it'd be great, I'm sure, as a teacher to have more resource and money, and everybody, I want more resource and money. Heck, who doesn't want more resource and money? But just because you had more resource and money, or maybe you got the new smart board up there, and maybe you got new computers for all those kids in the room, and maybe you, but you know what, if it doesn't fix what goes on back in their households with their parents, it doesn't matter how new of a computer or how great of a smart board
That's right.
they have.
Exactly.
But that's our answer. Go ahead.
No, excuse me. I was just looking at that and I was saying with that illustration right there, if you invert that, it will topple.
Oh yeah, it can't exist.
It's like an upside down triangle.
Yeah, it can't exist like that. That's a terrible triangle.
That's like a
I
side.
didn't pass math, I'll tell you right now.
It's not quite totally.
Geometry was not my deal. But that is a good point, because see, we have lost in America self-control because we don't want to rule ourselves. We want to be enabled. I want to sin and follow my lawlessness, and I want everybody to say, I'm okay. I want the government to give me tax exemptions. I want them to give me EBT cards. I want them to fund me. I want the church to marry me. I want everybody around me to say I'm okay, because I refuse to function under the precepts of God's Word, which is the only way we'll prosper. But you see, and this is the era you and I have been born to. Can I just tell you, I used to do this, and I don't anymore, but I used to say, Lord, why couldn't I have been born in another era? I feel like such an oddball in this era. Why couldn't I have been born in this place or this time period? I would have fit so much better. But you were born in this era. This is the era you and I were born in. These are the battles you and I are being called to. And no matter what I say, I'm not going anywhere. This is my era. Anyway, but it all self-control. And the Bible even says that. He says, if a man cannot rule his own house, how shall he rule the house of God?
Right.
So that's a biblical precept. And again, it should be a precept as we consider political candidates. And again, I'm not picking on our congressman, although he's easy to pick on because he's in the paper all the time. But if you can't rule your life, why am I letting you rule the federal treasury? But yet there are people out there who say it has nothing to do. And I'm going, it's got everything to do with it.
And Christian people are
Absolutely.
friends of ours.
It's just, I just groan. That's why, and is that not the Bible? It says when the wicked rule, the nation groans. But when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. Isn't it amazing how the Bible just sort of sums it all up? Anyway, give me something else that popped out to you. Anna, tell me.
Piggybacking on Brad, and you brought up the education system, that was kind of what stuck out to me, was how can the biblical family be used to restore the republic? And speaking from a teacher's perspective, part of the reason that the education system isn't working is because teachers have to spend so much of their time correcting issues that should be addressed at home, that we don't have time to get to our content and really bring the education. And so if the biblical family, the father and mother present, is at home, things like manners and basic respect for authority are non-issues.
Right.
And so we don't have to spend time saying, is that really how you should answer an adult?
Right.
Try again.
And also in what the public school has done, and let me just say, and I'm going to say this out loud, because before we get through this class, Anna, and with all due respect, because I believe there are teachers in the public school system that are valiant warriors, and they're missionaries.
We're fighting uphill. It's an uphill battle.
They're missionaries. So no disrespect intended, but we have got a broken system.
Already.
And teachers get a lot of heat, but it's not
Right.
it's not on their back, and there's some great teachers that are doing this. So I want to say that, and I'm not. So I've said it.
Sure.
I've stipulated it. But what happens is that what you have to do is you have to spend time, and that's what people start doing within the educational system. They get away from reading and writing and arithmetic, and they have to teach how to do life.
How to be a productive member of society.
Exactly, when you see when God's government has been broken. And so what happens is that the educational system begins to usurp, and maybe, and I understand why they did it, because they're going, parents aren't doing it. So I get it. But at the same time, we spend money on all these things, and our kids, they can't read, but they've spent how many years learning
Exactly.
other things that should have been. But again, it's convoluted. Now, the question that will come up through this class is what is the blueprint to fix that?
Right. Restore.
Okay, so, well, there may be a couple different ways, and it's never gonna be just one. See, this is, again, sweetie, you'll appreciate this. We always are looking for the key, aren't we?
Yes, always, that's my key.
We've done that for years. We've always looked, if I find this key, it'll answer everything. You know, the key to church growth, the key to, the key to prosperity, the key. Oh, we always want that one key, don't we? Just if I found that one key. Well, guys, there isn't gonna be one key. There's gonna be like a key ring. And all of them are gonna have to unlock some things in order to make it happen. But that's the blueprint. We gotta figure out a blueprint, because public education in its inception wasn't a bad idea, and it wasn't necessarily non-biblical. But now what it will take to break it, to bring it back to an appropriate place is not going to be easy. And so, but that'll be one of the questions we'll wrestle with. Okay, how about some of you other guys? Anything else just kind of leap out yet to Robert?
Well, I really wanted to read an excerpt of what I did.
Sure.
It was out of Rule of the Nations, and it was interesting to me that everything that we're experiencing in government is based on where man is facing. And it basically says, in our day we have imitated the Israelites in their sin, not their faithfulness. We're facing similar problems at all levels. Governments are experiencing crises in authority, standards, financing, and stability. Until men turn to biblical standards for righteous government, beginning with self-government under God's law, there will be no long-term solutions. The conflicts between man's empire will continue. The dominoes will continue to fall, threatening whole civilizations. So that is like really.
Yeah, and I like the imagery he uses, dominoes. Because it doesn't happen instantly. In other words, you don't jettison to collapse. It's this domino effect. And what happens is with a domino, or even spiraling. Have you ever watched at the mall when they used to have those little spirals and you'd let your quarter go around? I mean, it's kind of slow, but when you get to the end, that thing, and that's where we're at. I mean, who would have thought the tsunami of acceptance with regards to same-sex marriage? I mean, it was a tsunami. But you know why? This is where we're at. And we're going to continue to see these things. And what's going to make it challenging for us is that when we step up and give not just the critique of what's going on in the culture, but the blueprint for success, you look like you're bizarre.
Well, how long, and you and I talked about this, that this book was written, what, 15? Yeah, 15.
Yeah, Ruler of the Nations was like in the late
20
80s,
Yeah, and so how much farther are we already down about midway, if not close to the bottom, from when he wrote this book?
Exactly. So we have our task cut out for us. But understand, when we're talking about self-government, you understand that in this room right now, you have to commit yourself to self-government. Because if we can't govern ourselves as believers, why would they even... You have to understand, a part of the equation as this all works together is that the world has to look at a template. They're blind. So they have to see certain things in order for it to arrest their attention. So if we divorce at the same rate, let's say, as the world does, and I'm not saying there aren't reasons. I mean, God gave reasons in His Word that divorce takes place. But if we're divorcing at the same rate as the world, for the same reasons as the world, then why would the world say, you've got anything to say to me about your marriages? Isn't that exactly what the gay community is saying to us about marriage?
Yes.
What right have you got to say anything to me about marriage when you guys aren't doing all that great a job with it as well? So the church is out of order. That's why God said, the judgment begins first at the house of God. Okay? Now that's not to say judgment didn't come to everyone else, but it's simply saying that for us, we've got, Paul said, he said, judge yourself first. And so we've got to put ourselves in order and our families in order. And what happens is that then out of that, God grants influence. God grants examples. There are things, now I realize, and that's why I'm reading certain eschatology books that are really resonating with me, because you can't do that overnight. You understand, if I've lived in my neighborhood, how long have we lived in our neighborhood?
8 years.
8 years. And we are just now in our neighborhood, I think, gaining influence with our neighbors.
And 2 of our neighbors were here today and at the altar.
Yeah. It's taken 8 years of walking the dog. Oh, really? And being solid, sharing the gospel, living calm. And believe me, if you came to the Baird house, well, we've got our dysfunctions. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I'm not trying to come off as a perfect person.
You do.
She's puts up with
I'm full
me.
of grace and mercy.
Take your time, number 1.
You see, this is, but this is going to be a part of the discussion. If we've got to develop see, Muslims win because they have a long-term
Yes,
strategy.
Exactly.
There is no eschatology in Islam.
Yeah.
Do you understand? Their eschatology is, we're going to take over the world. And it doesn't matter if it happens in my lifetime, my child's lifetime, or my grandchild's lifetime. We're going to take over the world. That is why God said
Yes.
to the Israelites when they went in, we do not get this, we read it, and I realize your atheist, secular friends throw these verses at you, and it makes you uncomfortable when God says, go into the land and utterly destroy. And what he was saying in that most people don't get, is he goes, if you don't utterly root out a mentality that is there, that baby that your heart is wanting to be so merciful towards, and I get it, believe me, and I'm on YouTube right now, and I'm probably going to get hammered on this one. But what God was saying is the baby that is so cute today is going to grow up, and now they'll strap bombs to themselves and run into malls and blow everyone up. Now, when you get that, you understand why God may have said to do as incredibly distasteful as that looks to us today. Now, I understand some of that was environmental, and if you can get these people out of that environment, you probably won't have kids that'll do that. But the whole point is to help you understand what was going on. This is a generational strategy of Islam. So even if we defeat ISIS, listen, Thomas Jefferson was facing Muslim problems with the pirates off the Barbary Coast, who would hijack and pirate American ships and hold them for ransom until that's when he established the Marines. And from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Yeah, you know the song. How did that song write? Because we sent the Marines to Northern Africa to fight Muslims. It's Teddy Roosevelt who said that he never saw anything worse than the Muslim horde. Can you imagine him being president today? He said, that's our problem. The Muslim, he said, is our problem. That's Teddy Roosevelt. You can go Google it and see all of his quotes on that. And now we have now we stand up and we say to America, well, it's not, Islam isn't the problem. Well, I'm sorry, there aren't a bunch of Baptists running around trying to take over our cities. They aren't. I don't see it. So, anyway, all right, give me something else. Does anybody else have anything that just kind of left out to them before we go? Yeah, Ted, talk.
I thought it was interesting the way it lays out that, and what Brad was talking about, the self-government, and that, that being the foundation, that you've got to have a successful self-government, family government, and church government if you're going to have a successful civil government.
Exactly.
If you're ever going to get to the point of it working.
That is a good point. And again, that's why Legacy Church participates in what is thought to be political. But again, you in this class are beginning to get the revelation that what we're doing is not being political, we're being faithful. We're being faithful to the Word, that Jesus is Lord of all. There is no arena of life that He is excluded from. And so His precepts are pressed into every arena of life. And this is our era. I mean, I'm not saying and again, we talk about everything. We talk about people's personal challenges and issues and dysfunctions and families and all these things across the board. But civil government is not exempt from this. Robert?
I'm just gonna go off of him and say, that's one reason, like, for example, Mark Sanford, we look at his family life and how he leads his family, which helps in voting, because if you can't lead that family, you can't self-govern yourself right, then how are you gonna lead a state, in government? So, but we get hammered on these conversations, you have somebody, well, you need to lead his private life private. Well, that's just not true, because when you go further up the ladder, yourself, you're more visible, and
Right.
your family life and all that stuff comes into account.
That's called compartmentalization. When we start saying his private life is private, his public life, compartmentalization.
Am I allowed to talk?
We'll let Chris go.
Okay.
All right, then I'll let you go.
Well, if Mark Sanford had been a military officer, he lost his commission.
There you go,
Yeah.
there you go, there you go.
You're right.
Don't you think that the reason people, you and I have talked about this, so I know you think this, and on the personal level of our friends who are supposedly spirit-filled Christians who vote for Mark Sanford, is because of, they say, well, I don't, in their hearts they're saying, well, I don't want to be a hypocrite because I was an adulterer too. And so can that not be brought all the way down the line as to why I don't spank my kids, why I don't make my children, is because I don't want to be a hypocrite.
How can I say to them not to do something because I was a rebel for 30 years of my life?
That's not,
No,
you can't think like that.
because
Right.
scripturally, His precepts work and are supposed to be applied to all people. So yes, you did that, you were in
Yes.
rebellion, but that does not delegitimize His precepts.
Right. It doesn't make that it's wrong to teach the truth.
And redemption, while that doesn't dismiss your past,
Right.
I know it can give the vibe, and I know kids well enough to know they seize upon every
Oh, yeah.
inconsistency that they think they'll see it. And what you simply do is you're an honest man. Absolutely, I was wrong. See, that's pride that refuses to say I was wrong.
Yes.
And you simply say I was wrong. If I could go back, I would change every decision I made. But you're right, I did that, and it cost me.
Yes.
The repercussions of my transgression were hard. I can help you and save you if you will listen to me, because if you will not listen to the voice of authority and experience, then all that is left for you is pain. Those are your two teachers, authority and experience. That's how most authority is authority, because they have a little experience. Or you have pain, and that's it. So choose your teacher.
Speaking of Mark Sanford, I actually ran into him a few years ago before the election and after all the stuff. And to me, he was very repentful. We had a long conversation, and he was, it seemed to be. However, my advice to him was to take more time. I felt like he needed more time. It was too fresh, and it was too soon. I believe in the process of restoration. I have several pastor friends who have been restored, and they're now pastoring again, so why should he not govern again if he's repentful? So I think what we have to do is we have to look at the whole. We've got to get counsel. We've got to seek those counselors out. And I think that's where he made his mistake. It takes time for people to be able to let go. It takes time for people to see the process of restoration in your life.
Exactly.
And until that happens, then it's going to happen, but it's got to be seen.
Yeah,
And I think with him,
because
that's
there are fruits of repentance. So
Yeah.
when you tell me that you've accepted, and he sat in front of my desk,
right.
and when you tell me that you accepted Jesus Christ, you understood some certain things, and you're trying, your life's been changed or it's been transformed, and you're telling me these things, and then in the next breath tell me how you went on vacation for a week with your mistress, and you continue to have sex outside of a covenant, and you're certainly not married. then what that tells me is that you're not being discipled, you're not under authority, you certainly don't understand just the basics of God's word, and so something is wrong in that area. Now, I agree with everything you said. Time, he needed somebody to disciple him. But listen to what the Great Commission is. This is our mandate. Go ye therefore into all the world and preach the gospel. And it says to disciple the nations, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And so the church's mandate, certainly evangelism is embedded within the Great Commission. But the most neon light of the Great Commission is the church's job is to disciple the nation.
But there's a problem if the church has backed down on their calling,
Right.
because they are more concerned about how many people are there. So you water down the word, you tell somebody they can be saved, but you don't tell them what that means and how your life will look different. And and what the simple, you stop living together, you stop having sex outside of marriage. I was in a church where they met you at the door and said, take off your lipstick, you heathen, okay? I'm not talking about that crazy stuff, but just the basics of what it means to be a Christian. But see, the pastors have dropped the ball on what they're
Because
doing.
understand in the beginning of America that the politicians would break. In fact, a lot of us don't realize in the constitutional struggle, we hear that when Ben Franklin said, hey, should we not be praying here? Certainly the same God that brought us through the war would be the one to help us here. But what we don't often hear is that they took a break and they all walked over to the church across the street and all the representatives sat down in church and the pastor preached to them or discipled them. Now here's our error, and I'm going to put things out here in a less delicate way, is that there was a day when the pastor had authority in the city. He was at least as bright in biblical application and worldview as the lawyers and the other professional people. And there was a respect that existed that enabled him to literally disciple these men who were in the halls of government. We don't have that anymore. We've dismissed that area so we can be cool, trendy. We want to look like Justin Bieber instead of remembering that our job is to disciple a nation. And so my question now is, when these guys come and want to talk to me, I no longer ask them what church they go to. I ask them, who is your pastor? And watch them.
They don't know his name.
I mean, it is the most amazing, that one question and watching what they do. Because they know they know what they should say in order to get the Christian church, who is compartmentalized. All they have to do is they go, I go to First Baptist Church of, wherever, and everybody goes, oh yeah, he's a brother. Yeah, well, who's your pastor? I watched one guy go, now who's we might have got a new one, I think. So I watched him do that in front of me. And I was just staring at him. I'm going, dude, I didn't say dude, and internally I'm just going, you shake your head. But you see, listen to me. Listen to me. We've got to understand that you have to be invited. You just can't invade. But when people see things, even when governments see things that work, it wants to hijack it and take credit for it. So we've got to begin to model these things in church. Everything from our personal life to our family life to our church life. We model certain things that arrest the attention of the world. Who else is a student here that maybe didn't get a chance to clap up? Yeah, Chris, tell me something, dude.
It might be kind of basic, but really the thing that stuck out to me was the idea that there is, the whole basis for the conversation, there is government outside of civil government. I mean, I think of like the relationship of the husband to the family, like the principal to the school and the CEO to the company. But I never really thought of like a family government. I never thought of the term applicable outside of civil government. And so it's interesting to me. It's like we say, he who controls the terms controls the conversation, Well, the definitions have changed and we don't even know it.
No, it's a perfect example, and that's a very important point. He who controls the vocabulary wins the debate. And if we're gonna define government as only one small sliver of what the scripture says, then yeah, we're gonna lose. Because then government can invade other arenas, which it's doing, and claim a legitimacy to control it. And God said you can't, no, the family is its own government, the church is its own government, which is why you have a First Amendment, which is why you have a Bill of Rights that enumerates what the restraints of the government, of civil government, upon your personal liberties, because you're a government too, and it can't cross those boundaries. Yeah, very good. Yes, ma'am.
Is that, the government is going to remember, because we are a lot of transition in this, the government is still there for the father. And I never realized that when I was looking at the scriptures in other places, that they take over and
Yeah.
like that was
You're
like,
bringing up a great point.
We couldn't hear what she was saying.
Yeah, well, she was talking about, it was interesting about the households, and of course, in DeMar's book, he is very much complementarian, which is the women's role as sort of the housekeeper, nurturer, and so, and again, I don't agree with everything DeMar writes, and so I think there's a legitimate place for women if they feel, they're called or have desires for careers. I don't think that's evil or necessarily bad. I do think, again, it was hijacked by feminism, feminism was the ability, the enemy's ability to, once again, divide appropriate government and covering. What they were wanting to do was, they were wanting women to have the same abilities as men in certain areas, and so now women have the same diseases and the same heart attacks and the same stresses. And again, I'm not demeaning women. I think if a woman wants to do that, I think she can do that. But it's interesting how we're built to carry things differently in God's design in government.
I
So,
was just more like intrigued, to me, it's like the government is trying to fulfill the role of a dad.
yes,
With a single mom.
yes, that the government is trying to fulfill the role of the father because we have so many single moms. Of course, we aren't holding our single males accountable with repercussions because the government comes in and supports them, whereas and again, I understand there is some child support issues that go on, but I guarantee it, you can fix a guy if you will force him to take, there's no responsibility really that's happening, yes.
Is everybody, well, I was just sitting here thinking right before she said that as the children's pastor, I'm just thinking, okay, what does this look like as I'm talking to these little people every week? And I was just thinking about Jack this morning now, and he wanted to go down for prayer, and he wanted to get prayed for him. And I thought, I need to begin to just sow, because I don't like to take whole lessons to talk about this or that. We kind of talk about our Bible sort of in the middle of me talking. I'm like slinging in, okay, we got to lay hands on people, we got to pray for the sick, we got to do it. And I thought, I need to start looking at those little boys, the Tobys and Jacks and Malachis, and start speaking into them that they're going to be the daddies. And they're going to have the government of their household. And that they're going to know that their job is to get an education and get a job so that you can take care of your family. And then you will have to make sure that there are rules in your house, and you will have to make sure that you are the boss, and you make sure that those rules are followed. And the girl's job is to support the daddies and to love them and to stand with and just begin to talk about that even right now.
Right.
When they're 6 and 7 and 8.
Right. And again, the church, as well as education, was originally meant to support what was supposed to be taking place in the home. These were because the Bible tells us, what do? We walk with our children along the way, teaching them.
As we see something going wrong.
Exactly, as you're walking. And, I think at times we were purposeful, and other times we probably weren't, but you see, Scripture talks about what that government looks like and how that teaching takes place.
I think it's good sometimes to just, when they see something, because your kids will see some other child really acting up in the middle of a restaurant. And so you just go, okay, so now let's look at what's wrong about that. And then let them say what's wrong with that. What should that daddy be doing right now? And I don't, of course, want to get for beating kids, but, well, that daddy should be making that little boy mind, or he should let him throw food, or he shouldn't let him crawl. Amy and I went to lunch the other day, and this kid's crawling around the booth through the
Yeah.
window to get to our booth, and you're like, and the parents are sitting there like doing nothing, you know, and you're just like, what are you doing, you know? But just, and let them learn along the way by asking them questions and seeing, you know, what they, because they may have some concepts that we think they don't even have. They may have it, but there's some things that they may be missing.
I know the biggest indicator for me is when my kid calls me on something that I taught him not to do. Dude, Braden is on it all the
Yeah,
time. He'll be like,
yeah.
Brad, or he'll go, Dad, that's lying. Like, I'll say something and he'll be like, are you serious? I'm like, no, I'm just kidding. He goes, no, Dad, that's a lie. You're not just kidding. And I'm like, you're right. You know? And so, I mean,
That's good though.
it's interesting, you know, when they are being taught, then they start seeing it and they start pointing out.
Yeah.
Even in you, you're like, oh, ow.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Very good. I've got, let me see what I've got here. I don't think I have but a couple minutes left before I do want to make sure that you got in your reading the 5-point structure of a biblical covenant. Make sure you just, you know, you review that. It's not going to be on a test anywhere because, well, I won't say that. It could be on a test. But the 5-point structure of a biblical covenant, if you want to know how a biblical covenant works, remember what he said was, and I'm going to put them in questions. He said, number 1, who's in charge? Number 2, to whom do I report? Number 3, what are the rules? Number 4, what happens if I disobey? And number 5 is, does this outfit have a future? Yeah, number 1, who's in charge? Who's in charge? Number 2, to whom do I report? You understand our earthly kings report to God. Now they're also to report to people. But everybody reports to God one day. Every man stands before God. Number 3, what are the rules? It's free, by the way. If you have technology, you can get ruler
No,
of the nation.
we have it, we just
Oh,
didn't know
okay.
what book you were reading.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. What are the rules? Although you're going to see it in this book as well. You'll see those same 5 points. What are the rules? Number 3. Number 4, what happens to me if I disobey? What happens to me if I disobey?
Or obey.
Or obey.
Well, yeah, there's blessing and cursing, yeah. There's blessings and cursings in the covenant. And then number 5, does this outfit have a future? Does this relationship have a future? Happens, covenant is to be the concept that exists in a covenant. Think about that in a marriage. Who's in charge? I'm putting a marriage in order. Who's in charge? Well, God ultimately is in charge. But the husband has covering responsibilities. To whom do I report? Can everybody answer that question within the marriage relationship? To whom do I report? Number 3, what are the rules? Are there not rules in a marriage? Oh yeah, there are rules in a marriage. You better know it. What happens if I obey or disobey?
It all counts and counts.
Something or nothing.
And does this relationship have a future? Oh yes. And one of the neat things about longevity that people don't see, and of course I just had my first grandson, and we've been married
32 years.
32 years, we'll come around the corner to 33. And you know, when you hear people have said through the years, you know, it's better. That really is true. That longevity has a blessing attached to it that you don't get in the early days. And you press through. And now the fruit of that is coming to be enjoyed. So anyway, those are the benefits of the covenant. All right. Any last question? Otherwise, we are at the time. Did it go fast? 3 hours?
Yeah,
I thought it went pretty fast for me. All right, so you know what you're doing next week. You're finishing your vocabulary. Make sure you understand your terms. I'll give you a new vocabulary sheet next week. Number 2 is read another couple chapters in Ruler of the Nation and the second chapter and do the questions. And actually, we did pretty good. I thought it went pretty well. To be honest with you, probably in the second and third hours, I'd like to hear more from you than me. be, but you did good. And so keep that in mind. That was solid tonight, but I'd like even, more input to be able to interact. So, but overall, we had a good night. Anything else before we go? All right, be blessed. You made it through class 1. It wasn't that painful, was it? All right. All right, guys, you're released. God bless you. We'll see you.